CNN released an article titled Western Allies Receive Increasingly Sobering Updates on Ukraine's Counteroffensive. This is the most difficult time of the war. Weeks into Ukraine's highly anticipated counteroffensive, Western officials describe increasingly sobering assessments about Ukraine's forces' abilities to retake significant territory. 4 senior U.S. and Western officials briefed on the latest intelligence told CNN. Quote, they're still going to see, for the next couple of weeks, if there is a chance of making some progress. But for them to really make progress that would change the balance of this conflict, I think it's extremely, highly unlikely, a senior Western diplomat told CNN. Another quote, our briefings are sobering. We're reminded of the challenges they face, said Rep. Mike Quigley, an Illinois Democrat who recently returned from meetings in Europe with U.S. commanders training Ukraine armed forces. Another senior Western diplomat said, quote, Russians have a number of defensive lines and they, the Ukrainian forces, haven't really gone through the first line. Even if they would keep on fighting for the next several weeks, if they haven't been able to make more breakthroughs throughout these last 7-8 weeks, what is the likelihood that they will suddenly, with more depleted forces, make them? Because the conditions are so hard. So this CNN article is really trying to sugarcoat it, but the situation on the ground is this counteroffensive is not working, and it doesn't appear like it's going to work. The Russians are so heavily entrenched. People don't understand. It's not what people think in their minds that it's the Civil War and there's 2 lines of people firing shots at each other. The Russians are so entrenched that the Ukrainians can't push through. They can't. They haven't even made it through the first line. And there's at least 7 lines of solid defense with mines and barbed wire and trenches and everything you could imagine keeping the Ukrainians out.
Ukrainian officials say heavy Russian defenses have slowed their month-long counteroffensive to a crawl and are now urging patience from Western allies. A senior Ukrainian official says an insane number of Russian landmines, up to 5 per square kilometre in some parts, is one reason for the slow going. Clearing those minefields is slow and deadly and dangerous work, and it's being done now by foot. That same official notes there's no deadlines to break through those fortified defensive lines.
And the big part is the mines. They don't have enough minesweepers. And when they go to sweep the mines, the Russians bombard them with artillery because they have artillery superiority. And it's just turned into a gruesome model of World War I. This is exactly what happened in World War I. It's trench warfare, and whichever side has artillery superiority wins. And that's what's happening. And the Ukrainians, this counteroffensive, they're just throwing bodies at the Russian wall. And what the Russians are doing is as soon as they encounter any resistance, they just pull back. And they wait for reinforcements to arrive. And while they're waiting in the back line, the Ukrainians are dismantling mines and trying to push through, and they can't. And they have to dismantle all these emplacements in order to make any progress. And in the meantime, the Russians are just waiting for their reinforcements. Reinforcements show up, artillery shows up, they push back in and just dismantle the Ukrainian offensive in that sector. And so how is Zelensky and the Ukrainians responding to this? Well, they decided to play the blame game. It's not our fault we're losing. In the article, another senior Western Democrat said this, quote, the problem, of course, here is the prospect of the blame game, that the Ukrainians would then blame it on us, saying that the Ukrainians, and more specifically Zelensky, are blaming the Western countries for their failing. They're not getting supplies fast enough. They're not getting their troops trained fast enough by Western officials. And I think the West is starting to really get fed up with it. These countries are sick of Zelensky insulting them to their face and making demands, as if he was in a position of authority over them. The article continues to say, these latest assessments represent a marked change from the optimism at the start of the counteroffensive. These officials say those expectations were, quote, unrealistic, and are now contributing to pressure on Ukraine from some in the West to begin peace negotiations, including considering the possibility of territorial concessions, which is what Zelensky says he'll never do. He won't cede any land. And my response to that is, land is not very valuable if you don't have anybody to live on it. Zelensky seems determined to let every Ukrainian man die before he cedes 1 inch of soil. What are these people fighting for? At some point, they're going to be so devastated, even solely from a population perspective, that this country is going to be so fragile and vulnerable in the future. And it may cease to be a country altogether. When you have no population, no economy, you lose allied support because of your actions during the conflict, what becomes of your country in the future, even if you push the Russians out? It's a dark thought. And Zelensky doesn't want to go to the negotiating table. He keeps saying he wants peace negotiations, but then he's adamant about not including the Russians, the other party that's necessary for peace negotiations. I actually talk about that in a previous video. I'll link that in the cards up here and down the description below. But it's very apparent this counteroffensive is not going well. One reason you can blame the Allied forces on is they're sending them non-uniform equipment, which means the US, Germany, England, all these countries are sending them equipment, tanks and guns and ammunition and artillery and all sorts of different things that should help aid Ukraine in this conflict, but they're not uniform. Each country has their individual specs for their equipment. And so if you learn how to operate an American tank, may not translate to a German tank. You learn how to operate British artillery, may not transfer to French artillery. And when the Ukrainian soldiers are only getting several weeks of training and they may be trained on a specific piece of equipment, they can't organize or transfer to other equipments. They don't have the know-how and they don't have the structure to do that. And so though they have a lot of resources, they can't utilize them well to their fullest capacity. So a lot of the money we send, it's not doing what it was meant to do. So I think people are sick of the war in general. My opinion of the war is the same as Trump's.
I want everybody to stop dying. They're dying. Russians and Ukrainians. I want them to stop dying.
Because we have to remember, what are we fighting for here? What's more important? The lives of millions of people or a small piece of your land? And it seems that if this conflict continues, they'll lose both. So now that you've heard what I think, I want to know what you think. Do you think Ukraine should surrender? Should they go to the negotiation table with Russia? Should they keep pressing? Let me know what you think down in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.